All right, we're recording. Welcome everyone, let's get started. We have a number of participants who've joined us. We expect more to come in momentarily. And thank you to the candidates. I'll introduce in just a second for joining us. This is New Downtown Dems 2021 Council District 1 New York City Council Candidate Forum. We're excited to have with us 5 of the candidates for that position, including Tiffany Winbush, Christopher Marte, Maron, Gigi Li, and Jenny Lowe. Just very briefly, I want to welcome everyone on behalf of our entire club. I'm Patrick Cannell, along with Michael Kramer, and co-president of the club. We are a few years old now and filled with a lot of folks who are more or less new to the process that we've been getting our feet wet for a couple of years now. This will be the, I think, 4th or 5th candidate forum in this election cycle that we've participated in, including the district attorney and Manhattan Borough President, Comptroller, etc. We have a mayoral forum and public advocate forum with other downtown clubs coming up. But we thought it was important to hear specifically from our council district candidates today. So we have a pretty lively show, we hope, ready to go. And this is all to culminate in our endorsement meeting that we will hold as a club on Saturday, February 13th at 4:00 p.m. More details on that will follow. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael to introduce the candidates and to set us off for their opening statements.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So we're going to ask the 5 candidates to take 2 minutes each to introduce themselves. We're going to do, to begin with, we're going to do it in alphabetical order. And Leslie is going to keep timing. She'll give you like a 15-second warning before your 2 minutes are up. So let's start with Gigi. Can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
There we go.
Perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone. As many of you know me, good to see many familiar faces. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'm one of the candidates seeking your club's endorsement for Lower Manhattan Council District 1. A little bit about myself. Immigrated here as a young child, first in my family to go to college. Have spent pretty much my entire professional career working in Lower Manhattan and for the residents of Lower Manhattan and the city, first as a counselor for families impacted by domestic violence and partner violence, and then went to social work school. And a lot of what I learned in social work school really forms the basis of how I approach my thinking on policy issues. And then for 10 years was part of a nonprofit that focused on youth and children's services on the state and city level, organized rallies around budget and policy for funding streams like the Summer Youth Employment Program, tripled the size of that program, was on the mayor's task force to help design and implement UPK NYC, among some other things, and then spent 10 years on Community Board 3, where I really got to learn the ins and outs of very local work with all the agencies. And then for the past 2 years has been with the Office of Councilmember Margaret Chin. So I believe that it is the culmination of all these experiences of my passion to serve Lower Manhattan, along with my 3 generations, and now with my 3-month-old baby, the 4th generation Lower Manhattan resident, that really sets me apart from the other candidates. I have over a decade of positions on every possible issue that you can think of. And I'll tell it like it is, and be open and upfront about what I think and what I believe in. And so with that, I will close and stay true to the 2-minute mark.
Thank you, Gigi.
Thank
you. Jenny, you're next. You need to unmute. Thank you. You're good.
Hi, it's good to see so many of you today. Good afternoon. I am running for city council because I have spent my entire adult life helping working families, immigrants, and those who are marginalized. My family and I came to this country when I was 12, and I didn't even know the alphabet. It was because of the great education that I have received in public school that opened opportunities for me. I was able to get into Brooklyn Tech and went to Yale, and I came back. I came back to be a community banker for 25 years, along with being lending to small businesses, as well as making grants, managing a multi-million dollar grants portfolio for nonprofit organizations in Manhattan. I have been a nonprofit leader for 30 years, and now I serve as the director of administrative services at the city council. Two jobs out there, but this is my current job. It is because of my experience that people have asked me to run for years. Now that I've seen the devastation caused by COVID, I'm ready. I'm ready to put my experience, my skills, and my passion to work for the city and work for the people in District 1. I am, as you know, 2021 will be a big turnover year for the city council with 37 members when seats being open. And I will be one of the few council members when I get elected who do not need any experience, and I can hit the ground running and start helping the city recover and bring equitable recovery for the working family and the residents of New York City.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Maud, you're next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maud Maron, and I'm running for City Council for District 1. For some of you know me, and hello to all of the familiar faces. And for those of you who don't, I am a mom of 4 kids. My husband and I are raising our kids here in Lower Manhattan, where I have lived for 2 decades. Our kids are in public school. They range in age from 4 years old to 14. So I have the whole gamut of kids in school right now. Well, not in school; they're in my living room. But ordinarily, they're in school. I have worked my whole life as a public defender. My adult career as a public defender, working in the criminal defense practice of the largest public defender agency in New York City. So I regularly stand up for people and defend their rights. Before that, after college, I worked for the New York City Parks Department. And I have worked for the last several years as an elected parent volunteer in our school system. And doing that has given me a lot of insight into how our city works. Obviously, the New York City school budget is one of the biggest budget items in our city. We spend $34 billion to run our schools. We spend twice the national average on our students, and we're not getting the results, I think most of us would agree, for the students that deserve a really excellent public school education. I've worked hard in that capacity to support and improve our schools along a lot of different metrics. I worked in an integration team that secured a $2.6 million grant for District 2, which overlaps in some parts and not others with City Council District 1. And I have worked hard to work with other parents across who have different opinions and different ideas about how to improve our schools, but I think we have a lot of shared goals in how to make our schools better. I'm running right now because there are so many things that require a bold leader who will stand up and fight for us right now. We need our small businesses and our small property owners to be able to climb out of the economic devastation of COVID. We see a lot of people that are working harder for less, and that's just not an acceptable way for New Yorkers to have to struggle through this pandemic. We need clean, safe streets where a woman can walk home from work at night and feel safe. And we need, as I've said, excellent schools for all our children. And I think I am well positioned and have demonstrated that I am a candidate very willing to stand up and fight for the things that we New Yorkers need right now.
Thank you, Maud. Christopher, you're next.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christopher Marte. For the past 3 years, I've worked at an organization called Arena, where I help Democrats defeat the IDC in the state Senate. I was born and raised on the Lower East Side, where my dad ran a bodega just underneath my building. I attended public school and eventually started a career in finance. But as I saw challenges come up in our community, I realized I wanted to help the neighborhood that raised me. So I started to get involved. Through this work, I realized that many of our problems came from the same source. So in 2017, I ran for city council in a tight primary where I fell short by just 1% of the vote. But what we started outlived election day, and the coalition we helped build achieved major victories. 3 years ago, when the families of 85 Bowery were being evicted, we organized our community to support them. And after 9 months, they were finally able to return home. When the city approved 4 luxury towers and the 2 bridges, we organized and delivered 5,000 petitions to City Hall and won a lawsuit to temporarily stop the construction. When the mayor announced a new mega jail in Chinatown, I co-founded a community organization with Chinatown leaders and led a 1,000-person march through the streets. We filed the lawsuit and won and sent the city back to the drawing board. These campaigns were born of dire circumstances, but we won because of relentless hope. This campaign is no different. We have hard fights ahead of us, whether it's saving our seaport, keeping Governor's Island as a park, or finally enacting comprehensive and community-based land policy. We know that the next few years will be difficult, but we have already shown if we organize, unite, and have a plan for our district, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I look forward to answering your questions.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Tiffany? You need to, you're muted, Tiffany.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm Tiffany Winbush, and I am as well running to hopefully serve our community on the City Council. I am a 15-year resident of the Financial District. I relocated here from Louisiana very shortly after high school after college to pursue my career in marketing and communications. When I relocated to New York City, I knew all of 2 people. I immediately knew that I needed to get connected and plugged in with my new community in the Financial District in Lower Manhattan. One of the things that I did is that I was able to join the community board and serve 3 terms on Community Board 1. While a part of the community board, I had an opportunity to serve on the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. On that particular committee, we really focused on identifying buildings in our community that had received tax breaks, the 421A tax break, and they were not offering these breaks to their tenants. As a group, we got together, we made a list of those particular buildings. We then put the landlords on notice to let them know that we are aware that you have this tax break and you should be offering that break to your residents. And then we notified residents as well so that they can go through the proper channels in order to ask for the proper lease that showed what they truly should be paying. Ultimately, this led to several buildings within the district suing their landlords in order to really make sure that their voices were heard. I am a proud parent of a public school student. I have a daughter who is currently in 3rd grade and soon to be 4-year-old who will be starting pre-K later in the fall. I am very much a believer in equity in education. We need to ensure that each and every child within the New York City public school system receives an equitable education, no matter their background, no matter their neighborhood, and no matter their parent involvement. Most recently, I have realized that there are many food insecure people within our neighborhood. So I've worked with a local organization to make sure that food was delivered 3 times a week to people in the Chinatown, Civic Center, and Tribeca area. I also as well worked very closely with several downtown neighbors through Friends of FIDI to focus on inclusive communities and inclusive neighborhood. And then most recently, when I realized that many families at my daughter's school would not utilize those pandemic EBT funds that all New York City public school parents were issued at the start of the school year, I coordinated with a local food pantry green market downtown so that families could ultimately use their pandemic EBT and donate them through purchasing food to families in the neighborhood who may need that information, who may need the additional food. I tell myself often that I am passionate about our community. This community welcomed me with open arms when I relocated in here 15 years ago. They showed me the ropes. They introduced me to people who called this place home for many years when no one wanted to live downtown. And I'm absolutely grateful and indebted to each and every person that made me feel like I was a member of the community when I relocated here 15 years ago. I hope to represent this community on the New York City Council, to lead with empathy, to lead with compassion, and really focus on inclusivity for all.
Thank you, Tiffany. Okay, so now we're going to go into a segment where we had sent all the candidates 4 standardized questions. We're going to ask the candidates to each individually answer 1 question at a time. We're going to do it in reverse alphabetical order. So Tiffany, you're up first. Can the public sector provide community amenities without real estate development?
Thanks for the question, Michael. So yes, I do think it is possible for the community to have amenities without the help of developers. Will it be easy? No. But I think we also as well have to rethink what are those amenities that we want in our community. Is it an amenity of ensuring that we have open space so that people can enjoy parks and green spaces? We all realized, at the height of COVID, how important it was to have those outdoor amenities. Or are we a community who feels that we need to have access to a concert venue? Like, what are those amenities that we need within our community? And I think that we need to determine and decide what those are as a community. Yes, I think it is extremely possible to do that, to work, to provide those items without having to depend on developers. There have been opportunities where developers have provided amenities where, ultimately the community has benefited and it has been good for the community. Whereas if you think of like maybe a new school that has come online, but I think, yes, hard work. It also takes this city deciding that they want to invest in communities and not just invest in some communities, but all communities across the board. So we could make it happen. We can get there. It will not be easy because it does take money. We have to determine as a community what amenities we think are the most important. And the city as well has to make sure that they provide those finances to roll out those amenities within local communities.
Thank you, Tiffany. And please be as specific as possible, everybody. Chris, you're next.
Yes, I think we can definitely build these amenities. We just saw the state deliver on the promise of bringing back Penn Station and the Moynihan Station. And just a year ago, we rebuilt the Tappan Zee Bridge. We can build beautiful structures and create good jobs if we have the political will to do so. Locally, we just saw the hypocrisy in action. The developers in the 2 bridges said if the city allowed them to build these luxury towers, they will actually make the repairs on the East Broadway F train stop. Just last week, the station got the repairs without the towers going up. Another example, for the past few years, we've seen the developers promise amenities like POPs. And more recently, we've been seeing these POPs being taken away from our community, even though they were granted to us so developers could develop higher. As a council member, I will fight for public funding to go to public amenities without taking shortcuts that often lack the accountability and the follow-through that we need in this community.
Thank you, Chris. Maud?
Hi. Well, yes, absolutely. We can. There are many different things we can do as a city and as communities when it comes to our public amenities. When after college and before law school, I worked for an organization I worked for the New York City Parks Department, but I was primarily working with the Randall's Island Park Alliance. And this was, I will date myself, but this was in the early 1990s. When Randall's Island Park was not what we New Yorkers are able to enjoy now. Even though it's not downtown, there are lots of downtown families including mine, whose children play sports on Randall's Island. And the reason that park has the amount of amenities it does is because of a public-private partnership that was established, modeled largely after the Central Park Conservancy. So you had public taxpayer funds going to support the staff and the urban planning to develop an underutilized park space, but you also had private money being raised and an organization that invited sort of a conversation with the city in terms of how to best use the public space. And what that organization has been able to do, actually the woman who ran it just recently retired, she was there for over 25 years. What it was able to do is expand the number of amenities that were available to New Yorkers, right? For those of you who are familiar with the park pre-Icahn Stadium, pre the golf range that was out there, it was a lot of just open park space that wasn't very well utilized or very accessible for the kind of sports programming that's out there now. So when you use smart vehicles to try to combine what will be going forward limited public dollars because of COVID and because of the economic downturn in our city. We are going to have limited public dollars. So we have to be creative and smart about how to work with private industry and work with structures like public-private partnerships so that we can create the amenities that we need in partnership with all of the people of New York City.
Thank you, Maud. Jenny?
So thank you for that question. So I agree with some of what the other candidates have said. We absolutely are able to provide public amenity without developer money. We have done it in the past. We will continue to do that. I think when we are faced with when developers come in with a proposal that's fully cooked and then and give us a forced choice of what they believe to be the only choice for us, we do not have to accept that. I believe in when we have development projects in our district, I believe in smart development. What that means is that we need to have full engagement of the residents in that area. We need to have every step of the way transparent process with in consultation and input, real input from the residents of the area, so that we have the input of the residents and how they are impacted. We can't just have people coming in and develop and say, we give you this little bit of affordable housing and we build X height and so many total luxury or market rate housing. We do not need to accept that. As a council member, I would demand that all proposals to develop needs to make sure that it's not just about housing, it's not just about the price of the housing, but it's also about other aspects of a community that is very much needed. We need to make sure that we have enough schools, enough seats for the children who will be moving in with their family. We need to have grocery stores. We need to have community space, all planned in a comprehensive way instead of having building one building here, another building here. And that to me does not work. So I will, as a council member, I will ensure that we, any project that develop in the district will have at least 30% affordable housing.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Gigi?
Hi, thank you, Michael. So of course, the public sector should be able to provide community amenities. It's one of the reasons that Lower Manhattan has some of the best public schools in the city. Just in the last 2 years that I've been with the council member's office, I have worked very closely to support PS 150, a new school at Trinity, as well as an expansion at Millennium High School. But I really, I want to take your advice and go very specific, right? Because I think that land use is all in the details. It depends on the project, right? If there is, for example, in Essex Crossing, it was government land. And so it was incumbent upon the community board to think about and ask for so much more, because that was our leverage. It's all about where you have leverage. For other projects where currently, and I've been very critical of the mandatory inclusionary housing program of the mayor, how do we do that, right? And what I support is modifying the ULURP process. The environmental review needs to be stronger and more comprehensive. We need to look at things like secondary displacement. We need to look at things, not just schools and community centers, but let's talk about transportation infrastructure, sewage infrastructure, resiliency. Everything is tied into, what development and bringing in new units, whether they are affordable or market rate. Development affects every aspect of that neighborhood immediately and also around it. So it is what I would commit to as your next council member is to really fight for a more comprehensive approach to planning and really leveraging the vote that matters, which is the council member vote at the very end of the ULURP process.
Thank you, Gigi. All right, we'll go on to our second question. How can Lower Manhattan be made resilient to defend itself against climate change? And Tiffany, you're back up again. You're muted, Tiffany.
Thanks
Okay.
for that question. So I recall Hurricane Sandy. I, at that time, had a very young daughter. She was less than 6 months at the time. And I remember how, we ultimately had to, I tell her the story all the time, evacuate to friends uptown because we didn't have, the electricity and we weren't sure when it would come back on in our particular building. And I say to so many others that we are not prepared for the next Hurricane Sandy. Unfortunately, it has been over 8 years. We know that there is still money that has gone unspent that we've received from both HUD as well as FEMA. And while the deadline may seem far away, that deadline is coming up in 2022, and we have to think about how we can best use those funds. We need to, of course, focus on making sure the waterways that are so close to so many of our small businesses and so many of our housing are not able to come, onto land should another Hurricane Sandy occur. So we do need to focus on some barriers that can, number one, be a part of the community aesthetically. So it's not, just big walls and barriers that's going to take away from the aesthetics of the community. So we need to focus on that. And we need to make sure that these are, put up, quickly and soundly before the next Hurricane Sandy happened. I know that there is, much discussion about essentially the overtake that the city wants to happen in the East River Park. And we know, as I've mentioned before, that outdoor space is so important. I am one for saying that we need to go back to the drawing board, especially in that particular instance. We have learned some unsavory things over the last several weeks about how that whole process panned out. We need to ensure that there is more community involvement going on. And we need to make sure that the funds that we have now are being spent adequately, and we're not waiting until the next, disaster to occur and waiting for money, when we already have some money in the pot that we need to put to use. So we do need to, number one, rethink any type of process that we want to take right now to essentially take away a community amenities and put up, resiliency barriers. We need to make sure that that's going to be the best thing for both the community and as well what's going to keep us safe. We need to also, if we're going to put up any barriers within our surrounding our community, that it's something that could be a part of the aesthetics of the community. And most importantly, we need to do it quickly before the next Hurricane Sandy happens. So let's focus on using the outstanding funds that we have right now in the city's budget, in the city's pot for this before another hurricane or disaster occurs, and then we are just waiting for more funds. So it's something that certainly needs to be extremely top of mind for the next city council and for the next administration of the city.
Thank you, Tiffany. Christopher?
Yeah, we can't be jumping from crisis to crisis, and I feel like that's what we're currently doing. From Hurricane Sandy, before that 9/11, and now with the pandemic and the next hurricane, we're not planning for the future. Right now, we have 4 different plans to protect Lower Manhattan with different timelines and hardly any coordination. I will make sure that I'll fill in that leadership void and demand better communications between agencies, community boards, and stakeholders. We also have to make sure that these agencies are held accountable so they actually send representatives that know what they're talking about when they talk to the community. I support the community plan for Resiliency Park at 250 Water Street, which will help expanding Battery Park Resiliency Project up to Tribeca, and the FIDI Neighborhood Association plan that'll make us less reliant on car use and reduce our emission. And I don't think we should be building on our coastlines if our coastlines are not protected. I'm the only candidate that has more than 4 sentences about climate change on our website because I think it's the biggest threat to our district. And if you don't make it a priority in your campaign, then you don't make it a priority in your office. And I'm willing to take that charge because it's not only our generation, it's our kids' generation as well.
Thank you, Chris. Maud, you're next.
Hi, yes. Well, I actually agree with some of what with Tiffany and Christopher have said, but I think unfortunately there's not one answer and that's true if you're talking to the experts about the best way to protect Lower Manhattan because we are a district that has a tremendous amount of shoreline. Like Tiffany, I was here with my kids when Hurricane Sandy hit and had to get 3 small kids at the time out of an apartment building that had no hot water and no lights. So I remember that well and know that we're underprepared for something similar hitting us now, despite many years and despite a lot of different plans. What I think we need to recognize is that we may not have a perfect way to be prepared for the next Hurricane Sandy. We have districts with very old buildings, with buildings that it's not economically feasible to change the way in which that the elevators work in all of our buildings, so that we wouldn't have buildings that folks who live in them wouldn't have access going forward if there was a sort of flooding. So one of the things we can and should do is make sure we have smaller plans in place. Like, obviously we'd like to be able to protect our whole district by coming up with these large scale resiliency plans that have been proposed. And to the extent that they're economically feasible and viable, we have to continue to investigate the various plans that have been proposed. But what we also need to do is make sure that we have smaller but really important plans in place to protect our seniors in the cases of electricity going out in buildings, so that we have the ability to identify people who need immediate help and who need assistance, getting access to food and getting access to medical care in the case of emergencies. And that is a smaller focus in some ways, but I think a really crucial and important focus, because after all, the reason we develop resiliency plans is to keep people safe. And so we need to focus on keeping individuals safe in the event of flooding and in the event of large-scale climate change, disasters like Hurricane Sandy.
Okay, thank you, Maud. Jenny?
Thank you. Climate change is real, and we don't have to keep reiterating that, but we really need to make sure that in Lower Manhattan, especially in this district where we are surrounded, basically a U shape, the bottom of the U is all water. So we do need to make sure that we can be protected should the next Hurricane Sandy come along. And while we don't know when it's going to come, but we need to be prepared. What had happened in Hurricane Sandy is a horrible thing. Not that we can't control Mother Nature, but there were communications issues from the city to the residents of Lower Manhattan, and especially those who have language barrier issues. People didn't know what it is that they need to do and where they can get help. And going up and down 40-story high buildings to help people get food and get water was something that I have done, and I hope that we don't have to do that again if we were better prepared. So I think overall, any kind of change that we need to do in the shoreline, we have to make sure that the local residents are being heard, and that we can't just come up with a plan like the mayor did with the East River project, Park project, and just say, here's the plan and this is what we're going to do. We can't do that. We need to make sure that any kind of change in any neighborhood must have transparency and input from the local residents. And that's the most critical thing for any kind of project in our city, but specifically in our district. We need to make sure that we have to find ways to curb emission. And some of the projects that 14th Street worked really well with the busway. And I think initially a lot of people were skeptical about that, but it is something that we need to look into and find ways to have more public transportation coming to Lower Manhattan. One of the issues that I feel that we have is that we don't have enough public transportation coming down to Manhattan, especially, for example, the M103. The M101 and 102, they don't come all the way down to Manhattan, and people from below 6th Street have to wait forever for buses. That when you don't have good public transportation, many of the seniors and those who have mobility issues are forced to use their cars, and so you can't just stop them from using their car without providing an alternative. And I mean, I'm a big public transportation person, so I believe that when we have a good transit system, we will be able to help reduce the emission from regular passenger cars and others. So
thank you. Thank you. And Gigi.
Okay, so first off, during when Superstorm Sandy hit, Catherine McVeigh Hughes and I were the chairs of Community Board 1 and Community Board 3 respectively, and there's unlikely anyone that has spent more time and has more knowledge on resiliency issues than Catherine. So, her input has been essential over the years. But speaking about resiliency and climate change, I think one issue that we have to tackle, and I certainly will tackle as the next council member, is also around equity, around climate justice, right? While the whole of Lower Manhattan was devastated by Superstorm Sandy, we saw significant impacts to NYCHA infrastructure. Residents were living without with a lot of basic needs, and a lot of their park space, all of those trees, everything was devastated and took the longest to come back, right? So I want to acknowledge that there's an equity aspect here that we need to discuss. There are so many plans right now around the waterfront that are not coordinated. And again, because I want to get specific here, there's a lot of money being spent on consultants on every single level, whether it's federal, state, and city, right? And so I would, as council member, look into how we can have more transparency around all the money that some of it needs to go to consultants. But I think there is a lot of waste, and that is causing a lot of red tape. And there are plans that need to be discussed, but need to get past this whole everything's being stuck in consultant world, and to move it forward. And lastly, I think the plans need to be more comprehensive and more connected. When water comes up, it does not discriminate, right, on whether it's Battery Park City or FIDI or Lower East Side. And so having a comprehensiveness to these plans is also very, very important.
Okay, thank you, Gigi. Okay, we have two more questions, and in the interest of time, I'd ask you to sort of make it a shorter answer, maybe about 1 minute answers, please. The next question for Tiffany is, should Lower Manhattan be more welcoming to the homeless population?
Yes, so I fully believe that Lower Manhattan should be more open to the homelessness population, not only Lower Manhattan, but across the entire city. Right now, if you take a look at which boroughs, which neighborhoods, which communities are shouldering the shelters, the financial district is, not a part of that. You think of all the outer boroughs in the Bronx and the Queens and Brooklyn, those are primarily the communities and the neighborhoods that are sheltering the homeless and shelter communities. And so across the board, all neighborhoods need to make sure that they are doing their part. I want to go on and say that having to deal with anything different, anything new, especially homelessness, is going to be difficult. It is not going to be easy. It is going to be uncomfortable as well. And then, we have to think about that we ultimately are a society of people who oftentimes have to think about our immediate needs first before we think about the needs of the whole. I am hoping to serve in our community with compassion and with empathy. I know that there are people who look just like you and I, who a year ago before COVID were able to pay their bills on time, had no problem meeting their mortgage or rent needs, could always have food in ample supply. And so they're hurting. So when we think about homelessness, the face of homelessness is really not one type of face of homelessness. We have single men, we have families, we have those with mental illness, and we have to address them all.
Summarize. Thank you. All right, Christopher, you're next. Thank you, Chris. Tiffany. Chris, you're muted. Go.
Yes, we should. And there's been a lot of groups who have welcomed them in arms. I've been a part of working with small business owners to do a toy drive over the holidays to bring toys to 2 locations on the Lower East Side and 1 location down on Wall Street. It was a magical experience just seeing these kids actually having something for the holidays. I think Community Board 1 has done a great job of hosting open forums and leading the discussion, especially during the current situations. We had a council person that didn't tell the community what was happening until the very last minute, and that is completely unacceptable. I'll work with stakeholders, DHS, so no single neighborhood has an abundance of temporary hotel shelters. And this includes having private and non-for-profit homeless shelter be included in a fair share analysis. In addition, we have to address the current homelessness issue in FIDI and make sure that these individuals have the help and services they need. Our council member received $11 million in discretionary funds, a record within this administration. Those funds should be used for the folks who need it the most. And many of these individuals need the services, help right now, and we should be able to give it to them. I'll make sure after this pandemic is over that we use these empty hotels and convert them through zoning into affordable housing and Mitchell-Lama housing.
Okay. Thank you, Christopher. Maud, you're next.
Sure. It's not at all accurate to say that our communities have not shouldered their fair share of homeless shelters and homeless people downtown. And I think it is absolutely wrong to accuse the members of downtown neighborhoods of not being welcoming, because any community anywhere, in any borough and in any part of downtown has the right to expect that our streets are safe to walk at night, that we don't have the incident that we just had of a man being chased down the street by Canal Street and beaten and stripped of his clothes and gang assaulted. I mean, that's a real concern. I moved to New York. I was born in New York, but grew up outside New York, moved back to New York in the 80s, and have seen our city get safer and safer and safer. And as our city gets less safe in this past year, residents are absolutely allowed to talk about the ways in which the homeless shelter policy that has been put in place by Bill de Blasio has both failed to serve the actual people who are in need of shelter and who certainly deserve compassion, but has also put undue burdens on our communities that are absolutely unacceptable for communities to have to shelter. And our district in our lower Manhattan has had a tremendous number of shelters, some of which have been well run and some of which need improvement. Suggesting that we need to have more because we're not doing our fair share is simply not accurate.
Thank you, Maud. Okay, Jenny, you're next.
So I think the way we approach homelessness is really to find permanent homes for folks. We need to look at helping to find supportive housing for those who currently are in homeless shelters or not in any kind of temporary housing. When I was a grant officer at JP Morgan Chase, managing a multi-million-dollar grant portfolio, I worked with a number of nonprofit organizations that have been very successful in helping those who were formerly homeless and providing them with housing that what people call supportive housing. The Bowery Residents Committee, the VRC, have a very successful supportive housing where they help those who are formerly homeless get the help that they need, whether it is substance abuse issue or mental health issue, and provide them with job training program where they become successful in finding job, not only just having a home for themselves. We also have I also work with Breaking Ground. It used to be called Common Ground. Same thing. They took a hotel in the mid-20s near Chelsea, where they converted into a supportive housing and provided job training for those folks. Same issue. So when we talk about homeless shelter, yes, while we may need to have some temporary home in homeless shelter, but the way to address homelessness is supportive housing. And when I become a council member, I will work with nonprofit organizations that have been working in this field and have been successful in helping those who are formerly homeless, getting them a permanent home, but also getting them jobs that they can support themselves and be off the street for good.
Thank you, Jenny. Gigi. Can't hear you.
Sorry, there we go. So yes, I believe that Council District 1 does have a responsibility to help be part of the solution when it comes to homelessness. Again, I want to nail in on some specifics. Council District 1 as a whole absolutely has its fair share of homeless facilities. However, most of them are located in Community Board 3. And so if you even look at the district needs priorities for Community Board 1 and Community Board 3, they list safe havens and wanting safe havens as one of their priorities and wanting to help be part of the solution. The challenge though here is the location correct? And I think one of the most important aspects is the city needs to do a better job at vetting and making sure that these nonprofit providers are experienced, that they listen to the community, and they have a good track record. Because even though a nonprofit may be very successful in central Brooklyn in running a shelter, it does not mean that they can do well, for example, on Washington Street or on Worcester Street in Soho. I also think that regarding connecting them to social services and how transitional housing is important. And I totally support bringing back housing vouchers, because that has proven to be one of the best ways to bring stability transitioning outside from a homeless shelter.
Thank you, Gigi. Okay, our fourth question, which is really something we'd like very much to be specific and short, your answers. How would you make congestion pricing fairer for lower Manhattan car owners? We'll start with Tiffany.
Thanks. I just want to go back and point out really quickly that homelessness does not automatically equal violence, just as school integration does not automatically equal the lower of education standards. So with the congestion pricing, we know that this was talked about very much before we entered the world of COVID-19 and this pandemic. The congestion pricing, while it is necessary, is it necessary at this exact time? I would have to say the answer is no. If we plan on moving forward with that, we have to make sure that our residents who drive in the district are not hindered. We have to make sure that those who are supplying items to small business owners and our elderly who use cars because they cannot adequately use public transportation are not hurt in this instance. So yes, congestive pricing is important. It's probably not something we should focus on right now. There are other avenues and ways for the city to collect money. And should we move forward with it, we have to make sure that our residents, our elderly, and our small business owners who receive deliveries are not hindered and hampered by it.
Thank you, Tiffany. Christopher.
Yeah, and sadly, it seems like congestion pricing will happen under this administration. But we need to make sure that we make carve-outs for our seniors, folks who have physical disability, our small businesses, especially if they require a car for travel or to receive deliveries. Look, this can be a divisive issue in our neighborhood, and one that ultimately none of us will have in the city council to vote on. However, there's a lot we can do to ease the transit and congestion in our neighborhoods, to make FIDI more livable, to make the Lower East Side, especially Grand and Clinton, much more safer, and to make sure that we're fighting climate change, because it is the biggest threat to our generation. I'll work with DOT and neighboring districts to make sure that we have connected and protected bike lanes, not just to protect bikers or drivers, but to protect pedestrians, to make sure that cyclists aren't on our streets. I support the FIDI Neighborhood Association Plan, as I mentioned earlier, because this identifies unused streets and repurpose them for spaces for families and small businesses to continue to grow. And that's the model that we need to continue to increase throughout our district.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Maud.
Sure. Let me address congestion pricing, but I'll just I'll say two quick things first. Of course, homelessness doesn't equal crime directly, but there is absolutely a correlation. I have represented many homeless people over the years, many of whom are good people that you would want as your neighbors, people who are trying desperately to get themselves either back to a situation where they have a home because they're recently homeless, or people who have been struggling on the streets for years. I think it's ridiculous to try to insist on having conversations where people can't speak about the truth that they see in front of their own eyes every day by trying to hamstring a conversation by making it hard for people to just talk about what's the reality when they walk out the door and walk into their street. And I will also say, because it was mentioned, I absolutely do agree that we don't need to lower academic standards to achieve integrated schools. So all of the proposals that have been put forth to get rid of hard tests or to get rid of standardized tests as a precursor to creating integration, I find to be that exact argument, right? We don't need to do that in order to achieve integration. We can do both.
I may interrupt. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm going to move on to Jenny now.
Okay.
Jenny.
Thank you. I think, congestion pricing is not just about congestion pricing that we're talking about here is because it is also about street safety with respect to vehicle and bicycles and pedestrian. 3 years ago, I almost died from being hit by a car. So we need to really comprehensively talk about how do we coexist with pedestrian, bicyclists and drivers. So congestion pricing, I'll start with that for now, which is if we, if again, if this current council is going to pass the congestion pricing before we get there, then I would say that we need to have carve outs for the seniors, those who have mobility issues, and for small businesses who need delivery. We have to have that because otherwise our neighborhood would not be the way it is today without those carve out and help those who need the vehicle for their own mobility issue. And so that's what I would say about congestion pricing. But in terms of comprehensive planning for traffic, we definitely need to do better, and DOT really has to listen to local community concerns about the traffic and get that feedback. I mean, I have to say that having lived in Lower Manhattan and I grew up in Chinatown, one of the worst places in that have traffic issue is Chatham Square. They can't get it right. I don't know what it is, but it's very difficult for people, especially elderly and those who are young children, can't cross the street without being fearful or being hit. So I know that we have a lot to work on, but I think the most important thing to, as a council member, is to make sure that the input of those who are impacted are taken into consideration and their voice that's being heard, and they're not. There's transparency in how things are being modified with respect to our traffic infrastructure.
Thank you, Jenny. Gigi.
So I do believe that the city council and the state is going to embrace congestion pricing. I believe that specifically for the residents of Lower Manhattan, there needs to be carve outs and sliding scale approaches for lots of different populations. Again, for seniors, for those that have disabilities, but also because a significant portion of our district, both on the east side and the west side, are transportation deserts. We cannot tackle climate change and congestion pricing without talking about better investment in our public transportation system. Another reason that I believe that there needs to be some sort of carve out is because there's also additional car surcharges, right? So if you're going to have to pay more to drive a car, and your other option is to use a for-hire vehicle, you're then being asked to pay this extra additional surcharge, and so they kind of get you any which way, right? And so it should not cost, I think a board member once told me, just, it costs them like $30 just to go back and forth to a community board meeting as and everyone's a volunteer. So we do really need to think about how all of these pieces fit together to make sure that our communities are not really paying a more exorbitant price by doing the right thing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go on to audience questions. I think a lot of audience questions have been put into the chat now and directed to different candidates. Patrick and I are going to rotate in terms of asking the questions. So Patrick, you have your first question, and who is it for?
Okay, first question is for all of the candidates, and just to give everyone who is watching a sort of a preview, we intended to spend a lot of our time this afternoon allowing you all to ask questions, and you see those questions in the chat. It's possible we won't get to all of those questions, and folks may feel that they want to raise their hand as well to ask some. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can, but we have we budgeted about 10 minutes for each candidate, understanding that depending on the questions, it might not work out exactly that each candidate has 10 minutes or so, and we trust candidates will understand. But after that, and so everyone would stay tuned, we also have budgeted 15 minutes where the candidates will have a turn to ask each other questions. And so our first question coming out of the audience chat is from Eric Dillenberger. And he asks, sorry, I've just lost it. If elected, what would you, we were talking about the incidents of crime that have happened recently, and Eric highlighted two in the chat. And the question is, if elected, this is to each of the candidates, quickly, if elected, what would you be doing differently than the current administration to protect the public and prevent more crime like this in our neighborhood? So let's start with Chris.
I think we've seen crime go up because we're in a pandemic. Before the pandemic, we had social programs, health programs that were open during the day for people to get the services that they need. And so hopefully this remains temporary. And once we're open up again, we can make sure that not only the people who needed help before the pandemic, but there's going to be a lot more people who have dealt with isolation, who are dealing with substance abuse, who are dealing with a number of issues, get the help they need. And so I'm willing to use my own discretionary fund as a council member to make sure that we have our nonprofits like Henry Street Settlement, like CPC, like other organizations, to have the resources to be on the street, to go door knocking, to make sure that everyone's okay, because I know we can return to having safer streets. We're just in a difficult situation. If I was a council member today, I'll make sure that I'll be using those $11 million that we've got to go to these people who need it the most.
Thank you, Chris. Maud?
Yeah, I'm not very convinced that we can just rely on getting past the pandemic in order to make the real intense crime spike that we've seen go away. I think we have to work collaboratively with the NYPD. Particularly, we need to see more community and neighborhood patrols, both on our streets and in our subways. Our subways have had a tremendous spike in subway pushings and in violent crimes, and we need to make sure that people feel safe going to work, coming home from work, and they need to be able to see community patrols, put officers on feet in their neighborhoods so that they know that that our community is paying attention to the crime spike and treating it as a real and urgent concern and not something that's just likely to go away post-COVID.
Thank you. Tiffany, and then Jenny, and then Gigi, please.
I think if you look at where crime is taking place, and this is not only in our community, but if you see crime happening, more than likely you can trace it back to poverty and the lack of person having resources. You and I are not out committing crimes more than likely because all of our needs are being taken care of. So we really need to focus on, systematically, where are people needs not being met? Do they not have adequate housing? Do they not have an adequate job? Do they not have adequate food? Certainly, poverty is not the answer to everything crime related, but a lot of it is. So we need to focus on giving people what they need in order not to have to live in poverty so that they won't resort to a life of crime.
Thanks, Jenny.
Hi, I think one of the issues that we need to be really cognizant of is that why there is crime. And I agree partially with Tiffany, who said that people commit crime for a number of reasons, not just being in poverty, but also substance abuse, and there are also mental issues. And so as a society, we need to really help those folks where they need help with. So nonprofit organization that are helping with anti-poverty, social service organization, but I think a lot of it has to do, we need to focus more on is the mental health issue. We saw Thrive spending billions of dollars and we don't know where it went, right? Meanwhile, we have nonprofit organizations that are begging for dollars that help people in multi-language mental health services are not even getting a dime. And so social services organizations are very important. I served 30 years on the board of the Chinese American Planning Council that serve not just the Chinese immigrants, but also people in low-income families and a diverse set of services that across at least 3 or 4 boroughs of the city. So I understand what it takes, and I understand how we need to partner with social service organizations as well as mental health professionals to help folks. And do we need to be able to the police department to have a better relationship with our community? Absolutely. We need to make sure that the police department have the trust of the community and build back the relationship that we have had in past years. And that's one of the ways that I will work on, and working with nonprofits and the NYPD, and help our community become more aware, and building that relationship where we will hopefully reduce those incidents of crime because of mental health issue, substance abuse, and poverty.
Thank you, Gigi.
Thank you, Patrick. So crime is a symptom and not a root cause, right? And I think we really need to get down to the root cause of some of these issues. Mental health is a big part of that. Thrive NYC had $1 billion budget, and absolutely no accountability. We don't know how that $1 billion has been spent. And in fact, the Thrive team under Shirlane McCray has declined over and over again to share that information publicly and to share it with the city council. So one of the first things that I would do is to take Thrive apart and to really think about how we can better spend that money in very direct ways to deal with some of the promising models that we've seen that are holistic models in dealing with mental health issues. And hand in hand with that is job training and job preparedness. And I think that we have a very great organization that works citywide called the Lower East Side Employment Network that really tries to and has been very successful at connecting a lot of local residents to local job opportunities. And that a way we can do that is to also bake in some of those jobs to into any development project or any developer that gets tax breaks to build something. You should be giving back to the community. And one of those ways is to train the individuals in our community that are unemployed or underemployed. And so with NYPD, I agree, there needs to be a more community-based approach with NYPD. And I think that that means hiring police officers that are from our communities, hiring police officers that look like us, that speak our language, and understand the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you, Gigi. We have a question from Joanne Gorman. Current council member Chin testified in favor of a Howard Hughes Corporation proposed tower in the South Street Seaport Historic District. How would you have testified, for or against, and why? And Christopher, why don't you start?
I'm the only candidate that's been working with not only the Seaport Coalition, but with residents throughout the district in pushing back on 250 Water Street and the development by Howard Hughes. I not only testified last week at the LPC, but I also been testifying at community board hearings. And I plan to continue to testify and stand with parents, activists, seniors to make sure that this development doesn't happen and that we preserve the historic district. It's extremely important because once you penetrate one of our strongest protective zoning laws, then development can happen literally anywhere. And especially in our district, we see the threat of overdevelopment, not just in the Lower East Side, but now in Soho, NoHo, and in the Seaport. I've been standing with residents throughout this district to make sure that we build for people and not for profit. And I'll continue to do so as your council member.
Thank you, Chris. Maud?
Hi. I think it's a complicated issue because there is, for the same reasons that Gail Brewer, the Manhattan Borough President, is trying to find a way to create a development plan that supports the Seaport Museum and that supports some of the things that the whole community wants to support. I think there are pros and cons of that development. One thing that's very, very clear is that we don't need mega towers that loom over historic neighborhoods and that loom over neighborhoods when the community is opposed to them. But being opposed to everything, to all building all the time, is not a viable path forward for Lower Manhattan or for any neighborhood. So I think at some point we have to work with the proposals that are out there to come up with things that are more in keeping with scale of our communities and with things that can balance what we need, which is to preserve things like a seaport museum or to preserve things that our community wants and values, but that doesn't overwhelm our communities with the size of the projects. And so I do think we need to be able to look towards compromise and be able to have community conversations around how to build in a way that is respectful of our communities.
Thank you. Gigi? You're muted, Gigi.
Sorry, I keep doing that. So I agree that it is a complicated situation. However, I believe that the proposal as it stands is too tall. However, I do worry that the Seaport Historic District has been struggling for decades, and that we need to look into the future and think about what revitalization of that neighborhood and of that historic district looks like, and why it continues to struggle. And after Superstorm Sandy, it was just really sad to see how long it took for all of the restaurants to come back. And then now with COVID and all of the other businesses continue to struggle and are closing one by one. We also don't want it to become the next Times Square, right? And so look, Howard Hughes is a publicly traded company. They have lots and lots of money. We need to think about what makes sense as community givebacks. I do think that the percentage of affordable housing should be higher. And so I would pledge to continue to make sure that the community gets more out of this project than what is currently proposed.
Thank you. Tiffany, you're next.
So this, directly impacts myself and so many families who have children at either the Blue School or Peck Slip School, which is next to the development site. I understand that as New Yorkers, we are going to be faced with development, and the developer has an opportunity to develop at the height limit that is for that particular historic district. So they could move forward today and begin developing on that particular piece of property that they have. I want to make mention that, developing at the 120 feet height limit as they have would allow them to go in, develop, do their job, and get out quicker than it would be if they, do these mega towers. We have children who have been out of their school buildings full time for quite a while, and for them to return in the fall and to return to construction that's going to take up to 5-7 years, whatever it may be, that is an issue. So I encourage the developer to begin their project at the 120 feet height limit. And yes, community amenities are important, but I think we also have to be aware of if the community will actually get these amenities. For many people who use Lower Manhattan around the 4th of July to look at the fireworks, of course, not the previous year, but prior, you could not see those fireworks unless you had paid hundreds and hundreds of dollars to make a reservation at a local restaurant. And so while that was certainly helpful for those business owners, that meant that open community space was no longer an open community space for everyone, depending on what they could and could not afford. So I am hesitant to move forward with this above the height limit that's already required. They should begin their development with what they are able to do.
Thank you. Jenny?
So as I mentioned earlier about any development, it needs to have full input from the local residents. And if the input is just lip service, then it doesn't work. As a council member, I will make sure that issues like this have real input and local residents have a seat at the table in real time. So for this project, it's not just about the height is basically a huge issue, but also about the construction. During the time that it's constructed, there are 2 schools right across the street. Tiffany is right. Like when the kids go back to school, are they going to be dodging construction trucks coming in and out of the site? So it has to be a comprehensive plan. We have seen many developers giving community amenity as a way, as a cover to do whatever it is that helps them. But we really need to look at comprehensively from the time that the shovel is on the ground to the time when the building is complete, that the neighborhoods are protected, and dust and traffic, those are all issues that we need to iron out before we can agree to any kind of planning. So I want to make sure, like Michael have educated me on a lot about what is going on with and what the Seaport Coalition have been doing. So I want to make sure that if I would not support it until that the community issues are resolved to the satisfaction of the residents and those who are in the community.
Thank you. Patrick?
Thanks, Michael. Let's stick with the development theme, but before that, I think Stacy has a fair follow-on to this question. So very, very quickly, and in yes or no fashion, before we get to the next question, do you support the 120-foot height limit currently in place at the site for 250 Water Street? Start with Gigi.
I would be open to a development over 120 feet.
Jenny?
Sorry, I put myself on mute. If the community, I would say that I want to go with what the community wants. If 120 feet is what the local residents say that is amenable to them, they have to live with it. I don't live across the street there, but I would go with what the local residents want.
Tiffany?
I support the limit of 120 feet, and I welcome the developer to begin developing on that site at that limit.
Maud?
I support the 120 feet limit.
Chris?
I support the 120 feet limit, and this was a compromise made by the community already just a few years ago. The community board enacted a rezoning to protect that area, and so we have to stay committed to it.
All right, thanks for letting me sneak that follow-up in there. But the question I wanted to go to, while we're sticking with the theme of development, this is for all of the candidates and comes from our friend Therese Kreutzer, publisher of the Downtown Post NYC. Therese asks, I would like to know your position on the development of Governor's Island. What do you think of the current plans to develop it? Let's start, Maud.
Sure, I have a lot of concerns about the plans, the Governor's Island's plan at the moment, and I think we need to, I don't think it's ready, certainly not shovel ready to go forward at the moment. And I think we've heard from many of my fellow candidates about the importance of community input, and I think at this point, despite the fact that we're all on an endless number of Zooms in our life right now, we haven't had the necessary community outreach to let people fully and completely understand what those changes will look like in Governor's Island, and I think we're not ready to proceed with the plan as is.
Thank you. Gigi.
Unmute. Okay, so I agree that the plan for the expansion of and development on Governor's Island right now is problematic. It is a giant blank check that at the end of an administration that could go very, very differently with a new administration, right? They are essentially asking for millions of additional new square feet with very little checks and balances. And I don't think that that is something that I could support at this time. I certainly do hear the Harbor School parents, principals, that there should be an expansion of the Harbor School. I think if there's any development on Governor's Island, that needs to be central to the conversation.
Thanks. Chris.
I don't support the current proposal. Governor's Island is Central Park for District 1 residents. It's the one place we can go and stop thinking about the city, and it should remain like that. We should support organizations like the high school, like the Oyster Projects, things that are going to bring resiliency to our city and education. That's actually going to change how we do everyday business. And so I say no to the current proposal.
Thanks. Tiffany?
So Governor's Island is really an invaluable resource. Like so many New Yorkers, I am raising 2 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment, both me and my husband are working and, my kids are focusing on their education, Governor's Island allowed us to have an outlet, especially in the time of COVID. And every summer, we always made our way over to Governor's Island. So the current proposal to overdevelop it will really take away all of those benefits that are provided to District 1 and beyond. Just over the summer when Governor's Island opened back up, they decided to move their ferry to Red Hook so they can provide, travel that was more equitable to neighborhoods that had, underrepresentation of outdoor and green space. So we need to continue that habit of making sure that people could use Governor's Island, because there are so many New Yorkers who do not have access to adequate outdoor space.
Thank you. Jenny.
So I don't support the current proposal. Governor's Island, when my kid was young, we go there all the time. So it is invaluable to have that space for us as an outdoor space and it's set up. So I support expanding the school because it's an education facility and it's very unique to us to have the Harbor School there. But we need to make sure that any changes to that island has comprehensive community input. And like Tiffany said, love to expand that with other ferries going to other closer boroughs besides downtown Manhattan. It is a gem. So I would want to make sure that it's kept as such.
Thank you. Michael will take our next question. And just to note that on Governor's Island, I want to say a special shout out to our district leader, Daisy Paez, who was very instrumental in pushing the Trust for Governor's Island, of which I'm a member of the board, over the summer and last year to expand ferry access, particularly for folks on the Lower East Side with the impending closure of the East Side parks. So thank you to Daisy for that. Michael, over to you.
Okay, this is a question from Trevor Holland. There are no other proposed developments in the entire district as large as the Two Bridges mega tower proposal. Recently, we learned of another acquisition in Two Bridges that could further scar the waterfront. With development planned to start as early as this year, would you support the community-led rezoning plan for the Two Bridges Special District that is already at city planning? And let's start with Chris.
I support the Chinatown Working Group in its entirety, and this will actually protect our waterfront and protect other vulnerable neighborhoods throughout the Lower East Side and Chinatown. We've seen Lower East Side and Chinatown be kind of free for all for development, whether it's 4 hotels on the Bowery or luxury condos coming up on the waterfront. We need a council person that's going to bring the community back to the table and pass this plan to protect residents, not just now, but for the next generation.
Thank you. Maud?
There we go. I think the Chinatown Working Group is really a model for how to go forward in terms of looking at development, because we need to have really well-informed, data-informed and community-informed plans that that residents can have faith in, that their voices have been heard, and that is a truly workable plan. And I don't support unlimited building of towers on our waterfront. It's not what our neighbors and our communities need, and it's not what we want.
Gigi, you're next.
Sure. So, look, I do not support the mega towers that are proposed for Two Bridges. The Chinatown Working Group plan for that sub-district is contextual zoning, which I absolutely support. And Trevor, you and I have been in meetings to see how we can move that forward. And that's something I commit to doing as the council member. However, that being said, as the only candidate here that was part of the Chinatown Working Group for the 8 years that it was a group that had over 50 community-based organizations, and having chaired it and been on the executive committee, it is a plan that is over 200 pages that has options for each and every sub-district. And so to say that you support the entire plan, that is problematic because there are a lot of specifics in there that are subject to state and federal changes that are subject to MIH and ZQA being overturned, and also extend into Council District 2. So, and also every sub-district has two options. When we approached designing the plan, it was really to give it some flexibility. So I encourage everyone to read the plan and think about it from a comprehensive planning perspective.
Thank you. Tiffany?
So I think the Chinatown Working Group Plan is an example of what happens when community members can get together, they're brought to the table, and they are able to put their concerns on the forefront. So, anything that we decide to move forward with has to be not from a developer standpoint, but really has to be from a community standpoint. We know that particular plan focuses on ensuring that, there's continued diversity, that, there's stabilization so that people are not moved out of their communities in the place that they know and that they call home. So when we think about development, at the end of the day, as Jenny has said previously, we have to make sure that the community is always at the table with that. And we can't, our first thought process cannot be, when we think of development, to put in mega towers. That is not going to solve our issue of affordable housing in the city. It's really just going to take away from any community where mega towers are put.
Thank you. And Jenny?
So,
your microphone has been a little low. Please speak into the mic.
it must be the way I had it set up, so I don't know how to set it up. So I'll try to, can you hear me this way?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
better. Thank you.
I'll just, so the mega tower development is definitely a no-go in my opinion. For the developers to basically lie and got the city planning commission to accept that as a moderate modification is just like what we born yesterday. It is just totally outrageous. So as I mentioned earlier, no matter where you develop and what you're going to develop in any community, if the residents of that neighborhood is not at the table from the beginning, then I would not be supportive of it. As an elected council member by the residents of the community, I am there to make sure that their voices are heard. So if someone comes in with a plan without input from the beginning from the residents, I would not be supportive of it, period.
Thank you. Patrick, you're next.
Thanks. Just to stick with the theme of development for a moment, and I'm asking this question on behalf of folks who messaged me privately, but during her term, Councilmember Chin has been supportive but unable to deliver on a holistic street and sidewalk management plan, particularly for the financial district, which is the fastest growing residential neighborhood in all of New York City, as everybody surely knows, but for other parts of the district as well, Chinatown and certainly around Clinton Street on the Lower East Side, where we've seen a lot of congestion problems. And this is separate and apart from congestion pricing. But will you as a council member support and fight for a holistic street and sidewalk management plan? And if so, specifically, what would you propose and fight for? Let's start with Tiffany.
So Patrick, you're exactly right. I'm a financial district resident. I'm raising 2 kids here, trying to navigate, strollers and scooters on the sidewalk when there is not a plan in place does make it difficult. I fully support, putting out a roadmap to make our sidewalks, to make our, walkways a place that both residents and tourists, they'll be back soon, can fully take advantage of, but also those small business owners who are using the sidewalk to sell their wares. We don't want to do anything that would push, those individuals with either their food carts or, table stands that they set up out of the community, because we know that they are using that in order to provide for themselves and their families. But we do have to ensure that we make it a place where both, residents and whomever is using those, walkable spaces within the community can coexist with individuals who use those sidewalks for other things. And so that certainly has to be a priority. So I think that we do need to map out, what do we want our streets to look like and how do we make it happen? We also know, especially in the financial district community with our particular street grid, there are some streets that are going to be much wider than others. Water Street is a very wide street where you have some of the side streets like Fulton Street that are not so, acceptable to people to being able to walk and have things set up on the sidewalks. So we have to put some regulations into place that say, this is, these particular areas can be an area for both community and for other people who need to use that sidewalk space. And then other areas have to be off limits if you're going to make it conducive to the community to be able to use those particular spaces.
Thank you, Jenny.
So I would make sure that if, as a council member, I would make sure that we, again, have the people, those who are impacted at the table to develop that. But I agree that we need to make sure that the sidewalks are safe for the pedestrians. But if all of our sidewalks are all different sizes, right? So for those sidewalks where there is wide enough for the businesses to show their wear and within legal limits, and I think we should have that because that's part of the charm of our local district, where certain areas where the sidewalk is wide enough that the businesses show their wear on right next to in front of their store. So it is something that I would want to make sure that I get better educated in terms of traffic flow. I am not a traffic expert, but I pledge to learn and want to work with, again, local community and hear the voices of those who are impacted by any way that we design the streets.
Sorry, Maud, we'll go to you next, please. Thank you, Jenny.
Sure. When you look at the traffic patterns. So yes, of course, two thumbs up to supporting a holistic broad plan, but I think you have to look beyond just our district in order to be really thoughtful about it. When you look, I live very close to Canal Street, and we saw, it's quite old now, but when you change the toll structure on the Verrazano Bridge, it impacts the amount of traffic that you get through Canal Street. So we have to look at a broader picture of how traffic patterns that really impact how we live, how we cross the street, how our kids can safely cross the street, are impacted. We need to reduce car traffic overall, and a huge part of that is improving our public transportation and making sure that our subways and run on time, that our bus routes are increased, and that they're safe. I also think we need to not jump to too many pedestrian streets because we have to support our businesses right now. And we saw a lot of pushback from Chinatown merchants when there was a push to make certain streets, pedestrian only, because the people who run the businesses in the community know how those businesses will be hurt when you completely eliminate car traffic. And ultimately, this also ties in with right now the number of makeshift restaurants that we've put out onto the street. Of course, they've been a lifeline for some restaurants because they've had indoor dining closed down. But in a time where you can go to Hoboken or Nassau or Westchester and eat in a restaurant, I think we really have to think seriously about why we're driving so many restaurants out of business by erecting almost fully enclosed structures on our streets, which certainly don't add to the ability to navigate our streets successfully. So I know there will be some proposals to maintain some of those structures, and I think we have to seriously think about that in regard to this holistic plan, because we really need to get to a place where we allow local restaurants to be open to indoor dining.
Thank you, Maud. Chris, and then Gigi, please.
I'm the only candidate that has a community-based comprehensive rezoning plan that goes beyond platitudes. If you look at the Chinatown Working Group, which the group itself has endorsed my campaign for this city council race, the FIDI Neighborhood Association Plan, these are all plans that not only incorporate like what should be built, but what should our sidewalks, what plazas should look. So then it could be based, so the model could be based more for families in our communities, so then they can take their strollers to their schools and feel safe. We need to make sure that permitting is done the right way. I know we had some issues in FIDI was working with the community board and making sure that we can build a comprehensive neighborhood plan with the leadership of our council. And I'm ready to do that. I support the plans, not just FIDI and the Chinatown Working Group, but also the Seaport Plan created by the Seaport Coalition and the alternative to the Soho NoHo upzoning plan.
Thanks, Chris. Gigi?
Thanks, Patrick. So since you asked for specifics, in the financial district, I think you cannot talk about pedestrian space and sidewalk usage without talking about sanitation services and trash. I think we've seen many, many pictures of trash bags that are taller than ourselves. Many of you share them on Facebook. And so one, I would absolutely pilot the plan that both the FIDI Neighborhood Association, which you lead, as well as the Downtown Alliance has mapped out to pilot an area that is pedestrianization only. I think that if there is a plan that is supported both by residents as well as a business improvement district, it addresses some of the concerns around balancing small businesses as well as local residents. For the challenge on the Lower East Side on Grand Street, which we've been dealing with for a very, very long time, a lot of it is exacerbated by development, which is the other thing that none of the other candidates have really talked about, which is what are some of the other issues that are impacting transportation and congestion and public space. And so I would propose that in any area where there is an enormous amount of development, particularly over time, that there be a fund that these developers put money into, there is a task force that is developed to look at that area comprehensively, so that we are not looking at permits that close multiple streets at the same time at different times of day, that we hold our agencies as to a higher level of accountability and coordination, so that we don't, for example, dig up the same road 3 times for 3 different projects.
Thank you to all the candidates. Michael, turn it over to you.
I have a question from Greg Cooper, which I'm going to sort of consolidate. He talks about the role of real estate in fundraising for candidates. So I know I looked at the latest reports on the latest period that was reported, where Jenny had the highest amount of contributions, significantly higher than everybody else. And then Gigi, and then Tiffany, and then Chris, and then Maud. Could each of you speak about the role of fundraising in running as a candidate, and the importance of small donations, large donations, those kinds of things? Let's start with Gigi.
Sure. So I did not accept any money from PACs, police unions, lobbyists, real estate developers, and oil industry. So, and then I think that if you look at my filing, you'll see that I have donations as small as many donations at the $5 and $10 increment. And I also believe that amongst the candidates that have maxed out for the primary, that I have one of the lowest numbers of contributions at the $1,000 max amount.
Okay, thank you. Tiffany?
So I want to first start by saying that I am very proud of the amount that we have fundraised so far. You know, I am a non-traditional candidate. I have no political connections. I have, no endorsements to date. And there was a very skeleton team that, helped raise these funds. So I want to say going into it that I am very proud about that. I am, wanting to be a voice for people who feel as though their voice may necessarily not be, heard in this particular process. It is not lost to me that should I, represent our particular district, that, District 1, has the African burial ground, literally steps away on Wall Street. There are people who at one time looked like me who were being sold for the highest bidder. So I take pride in the fact that I was able to come and speak to people and show them my determination and passion for wanting to represent our community, and that they decided to donate to the campaign. Surely, like most of the candidates, we are, Tiffany for NYC.com, we're still, accepting donations, and I'm encouraging all residents to give $10 or $5 or whatever they can to support the campaign.
Thank you. Maud?
Hi. Yeah, I have, for all intents and purposes, stopped fundraising. I was able to reach the maximum public matching funds amount last year in 2020. And I'm very grateful to all of the donors who helped to get me there, and to the team, largely volunteer team, that helped us get there. I think that the success of fundraising speaks to the strength of the campaign.
Okay, thank you. Jenny?
Hi. So I started raising money in August, and in just a little bit over 3 months, I was able to raise the an amount to capture more than the maximum amount would be matched by the Campaign Finance Board. I'm very proud of the amount of funds that I raised in such a short time because of the outpouring of support from friends and district residents. I have a median contribution of $50. I have received over 162 contributions from in-district residents, and 87% of my contribution come from Black, Indigenous, people of color, and 87% of my contribution come from New York City residents. So while contribution is important, but I am only taking contribution from those who, I'm excluding contribution from real estate, lobbyists, and police, corporate PACs and police unions or associations. So the fact that I have been able to raise such a big amount of money in this one filing speaks for the tremendous support that I have. Yes, someone mentioned that I have the most number, or I have many $1,000 contribution, Bianca. You know why I have that? Those are my family, friends who have been waiting for me to run for office. And they finally are so happy that I'm running that they gave the maximum amount that that was allowed per individual.
Thank you, Jenny. And Chris, you've got the last say on this.
Thank you. And Michael, I want to correct you that both Jenny and I have fully funded campaigns, and she's only raised 200 more privately than me, but we were fully funded by last summer. And so we weren't actively collecting donations. But even with the donations that we collected over 700 contributions from New York City, the largest in this race. And it's larger by 300 more than the next leading candidate. And in district, we have over 400 in-district donors from all across the district: Tribeca, Chinatown, the Lower East Side, Vidi, the Seaport, and Greenwich Village, because everyone wants to invest in the vision that we have. The vision is for this district. And when I win, I'll make sure that this grassroots support is not only shown in the numbers, but is shown in our actions.
Okay, thank you, Chris. All right, we're going to pivot now to the part that could be a lot of fun when one candidate asks a question of another candidate. We ask that you ask a nice, simple, clean, clear question to that other candidate, and then that other candidate has 3 minutes to respond. So let's start with Gigi.
Okay, sure. So this question is for Chris. So I think that it has been made pretty clear that many of us support building affordable housing in this community. How do you propose building affordable housing when you have been against almost every plan that brings in affordable housing into Council District 1?
Well, I disagree. I haven't been against every development project in District 1. The plan I actually support, the Chinatown Working Group plan, it's a development plan. If you actually read the 200 pages like Gigi mentioned, it tells you what can be developed, but it also adds protection to make sure that it's affordable and it doesn't displace the residents who are living here now. I think the first thing we have to do is make sure that we rezone hotels and office spaces that aren't being used to create new, deeply affordable housing, and probably also Mitchell-Lama program housing as well. This is what I want to do. This district would not be the same after this pandemic. And we got to make sure that we take these empty spaces so we don't have to construct these massive new towers and actually build the housing that's needed for our city.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gigi. Tiffany, you're next.
Thank you. I'll direct my question to Maude. I know that you've mentioned earlier about the working group that you put together in order to focus on integration across school district 2. You know, there were some concerns that that particular working group was not as, you know, diverse as it could have been, that there could have been more BIPOC people on that particular group. And I just want to know your thoughts on the simple fact of, you know, integrating our schools so that all students can have a quality equity education. And if integrating schools ultimately means that we would have to lower our standards. I know you mentioned earlier that, you know, we should have testing in place because testing would ultimately prove, you know, who's up to par. But we know that there have been tons of studies that have confirmed that, you know, testing does not capture the true essence of, you know, Black and Brown communities.
Sure. I'm happy to answer those questions, Tiffany. Let me first correct you about how the team that I set on was structured. I didn't put it together. I was elected to the Community Education Council, and as a parent leader, I sat on a team that the district superintendent assembled. I was one parent leader on that team along with some others. That team was led by New York City Department of Education employees. It started before I was elected. It was an iterative process, and there were several phases of a grant. The grant money from the New York State Department of Education was available to several districts throughout school districts, DOE districts, throughout New York City, as well as throughout New York State. And several districts applied for those grants. The first 2 phases of it were non-competitive, and the third phase was competitive. We put together a very thoughtful integration grant proposal, which was funded by the New York State Department of Education at slightly over $2.6 million for our district, one of the highest grant awards of any of the districts. So it was very successful, and I was very happy to sit on it. I don't know where you get the information that it wasn't a diverse team, because it was. The superintendent, District Chumney, who put it together, had several people that were brought in under her leadership that actually made the team more diverse than it had been previously under the previous superintendent. So I commend her and the then.
To confirm, were there any Black families or Black parents who were represented on that particular integration?
Let her finish.
Yeah, thank you. So the district superintendent who put together that team did include myself as the president of Community Education Council 2 at the time, as well as several other additions. The person who, well, there were, I can provide you with all sorts of information about it. I could talk about this forever because I spent a lot of hours working on it, but we were led by a professor from Temple University whose theory on how to structure the integration grant is based on his work on disproportionality, which is what he is an African-American man, which is what he was using to create and bring integration plans throughout the district, because you cannot use race because it would violate Supreme Court law. It violates the law of this land to use race for integration plans. So you have to use other categories. And the categories that we used were socioeconomic status, English language learner status, students who came from Title I schools that receive federal money for that have a certain number of students living in poverty. It was a deeply thoughtful plan. I'm very proud of it. And I would invite you all to check out the great deal of information that Community School District 2 posted on the website, on our website, which is actually much more transparent and forthcoming than any of the other districts, and I'm very proud of that work.
Thank you, Maud. Jenny?
But I was on mute. So I wanted to just ask a question of Gigi, since now you're currently chief of staff for the current council member. how do you separate your work as a chief of staff and campaigning?
Sorry, can I ask a clarifying question? Do you mean like on my stance on issues, or can you just clarify the question?
Both on your stance on issue and your what you do when you campaign.
So, you know, there are positions that I disagree with the council member on, and when I disagree, or when I agree, actually, I make it very clear, sort of, am I in the capacity of a candidate, or is it a capacity of a employee of the city council and of the office of the council member, right? So, you know, I'm off the clock now. All of my positions here that I articulate, again, whether they are in line with the council member or are not, is personal, is my own, and as a candidate for city council.
Okay, thank you, Gigi. Maud, you're next.
Sure. I guess I'll ask this question to Christopher. When you, I'll just try to word it as briefly as I can. When your supporters choose to attack people, choose to attack other candidates, rather than engage in a substantive sort of good faith discussion over issues, do you think you have any responsibility to try to elevate the conversation and address the actual substantive issues that our community members want to hear about, or are you content to let the race descend into personal attacks?
You know, my supporters act independently, and a lot of, I think you're referring to the discussions around schools. A lot of them are schools activists, a lot of them are school leaders, and a lot of them had these conversations with you in those spaces. I wasn't in those meetings, but I think that I don't know what you're talking about specifically. But I support my supporters. You know, they're making these allegations because they've seen videos on the New York Times. They've seen articles that you've written in the Post. They've seen how you addressed the CEC, which you were unelected to stop being the leader of. And so I think they have some substance. And so I think it's really important that we listen to them because they've been in the room in those spaces.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Chris. Now you get to ask a question.
Yes, and my question is similar to the one Jenny said to Gigi, and this is to Jenny. You have worked for Corey Johnson for a number of years, and before that, you worked for CPC, which is a developer. However, you haven't taken a stance against the Chinatown jail until you started to run for office. This is the biggest issue that was facing not just Chinatown, but our whole district. As a district leader, as a state committee woman, why didn't you take a stronger position representing the people that you serve?
So thanks for that question, Chris, but I want to correct you for a couple of facts. So the Chinese American Planning Council is not a developer. So let me just say that very clearly. The Chinese American Planning Council is not a developer. It is a multi-social service organization that serves over 60,000 immigrants and low-income families a year. It is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Yes, it has its own property, one in Flushing and one is being built on Norfolk and Broome Street. So don't, Christopher, please, you know CPC is not a developer. So to say it that way is really disingenuous. I'm sorry that I have to clear that out. Yes, I work for Corey Johnson. I am the first and only Asian American woman serving in a senior staff position as currently today the director of administrative services at the city council. I have been doing a lot of work for the district as a leader in the district, being elected for 25 years as a district leader in this community. I support and I protect the community I don't just go in front of the microphone with a bullhorn and go in front of the cameras. I work with the community and the leaders in the community to help what is needed for the community. 35 years ago, when they were building the current tombs, I was there protecting and protesting and got us a comprehensive plan where now the tombs next door to the tombs is a complex that is held by a not-for-profit organization with a senior center, a childcare center, and a community health clinic. And actually a senior resident, not senior center, say that wrong. And the commercial spaces on the ground floor are held by a nonprofit organization. That's what we got. That's what I fought for. Currently, I have not been in front of the camera with a bullhorn like you did, Christopher, but I have been working in the ways that I could in protecting our community against the jail.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. So now I'm going to call for closing statements by each candidate. Leslie will enforce a 2-minute limit on that closing statement, and we're going to start with Gigi.
Thank you, Michael. So thank you everyone for your time. I am currently endorsed by 4 council members, Councilmember Chin, Councilmember Rosenthal, Councilmember Ayala, and Councilmember Rose, who are all strong women council members that share the belief that I can lead Council District 1 and am prepared for this job on day one, right? I have the experience around not only policy, but budget. I have fought for my entire adult life, social services, seniors, which we haven't talked about very much in this panel, that continue to be a very important population that we need to continue supporting, as well as building new schools. And so day one, I believe that there is a lot of work to do. Again, you may not share all of the same priorities or beliefs that I do. However, what I promise you is that I will be straightforward with you. I will engage with you, and you will know where I stand on issues, and just be very forthcoming and to invite you to be part of that engagement process. Being a social worker, I understand the importance of bringing a diversity of groups together and to really look at them creatively, all of the different ways that a problem comes to exist, but also working backwards on figuring out how we can use our collective strengths to solve an issue. So I thank you for your time, and I hope that I will have your endorsement and your vote on June 22nd.
Thank you, Gigi. Chris, you're next. You're muted. There you go.
Everyone, thank you for hosting this forum. I know many of you on this call from local activism because we've been fighting the fight even before we were running for office. So I'm not running for office to advance my career, but to advance our community. I already been doing the work that our council office should be doing. Before this pandemic, we were working with communities to pass community-based land use policy. During this pandemic, we were able to organize food deliveries for seniors and low-income families, fundraise to get home attendants, PPE, help small businesses to connect them to local community banks. And we've been doing a lot of the work to project what the future of our district is. And that's why I'm excited about the conversations that we had today and the conversations I look forward to having as your council member. I've been there always testifying at 250 Water Street. I met with the Seaports Coalition for over 2 years now. And we have connected land use struggles from the Seaport to Soho, to Lower East Side and Chinatown. I have the track record, the experience, and the relationship to use this office to create a more resiliency, livable, and affordable community for all residents in Lower Manhattan. I'm asking for your support and endorsement because I respect the work each member of this club does and has been doing for their block, their community board, and our city. Coming out of this pandemic is going to take a lot of work, but we can also go into it as a unified district, working with each other and trying to fight for each other's causes. And I look forward to doing that with you.
Thank you, Chris. Jenny, you're next.
Well, thank you all for hosting this forum. I am delighted to have been here and listened to many of you and your questions. I am one of the few candidates in running for city council in this cycle that have over 30 years of experience from the corporate sector, private sector, and the nonprofit sector and public sector. With my combination of 30 years of experience that have helped numerous businesses and as well as making loans to small businesses post 9/11 in downtown, helping them get back on their feet. This is the time of the city where we need individuals who are elected to office, especially council members, when there's such a huge turnover. We need council members who have been there, have a proven track record, who will be able to help deliberate those very difficult decisions for the city and for the district. And I am one of those few council members who will be able to do that, elected. So far, not only just about being able to raise the funds in such a short time, but I have garnered endorsements from city council, Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, State Senator John Liu, and the Jim Owls Liberal Democratic Club, and District Leader Daisy Paez. And recently, I just announced I received endorsement of the United Federation of Teachers, one of the largest labor unions in the city. I have gotten these endorsements not just because they like me, it's because they have seen my track record and what I have done for the communities. So when I get to the city council, I will be able to work with a network of folks who have done the work in the community, including elected officials and community leaders that I've been fighting with alongside for years, and
Thank you.
be able to
Please wrap up.
help this district bring about equitable recovery for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, and now we will hear from Tiffany.
Well, thanks again, everyone, for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to do so. As you are considering who you will personally cast your ballot for on June 22nd, I hope you would consider voting for Tiffany Winbush for New York City Council. I am honored to have come a part of this neighborhood 15 years ago and made this district, this community, Lower Manhattan, my home. Should I am elected to serve as the council member from this district, I will focus on ensuring that this is a inclusive community for each and every person who calls this place home and each and every person who wants to call this place home. I have had the opportunity to, help out people in need, whether it have been, garnishing, making sure people have food to eat, connecting my fellow neighbors with one another should they have any issues. And I just look forward to be able to do that on an even larger scale on the New York City Council. So I appreciate your support. Should you have any further questions, you can also always visit my website at tiffanyfornyc.com, and from there you can email me. Thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Maud, your turn.
Yes, thank you all for staying and for listening this long and for hosting this forum. I will first mention something about schools really quickly. Christopher mentioned that I have written some things on this topic, and I encourage everyone to actually read the stuff that I've written, including the op-ed that I wrote in the New York Post last summer, because I think if you hear my actual words, you'll actually agree with a lot of what I have to say. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of name calling, and a lot of inaccuracies. But my grandmother always told me, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think that's true. And I think we all want a city council person who can stand up for our communities, who can push back on inaccuracies and on people who would rather, name call and character assassinate than work together on our shared goals. And when it comes to schools, we clearly have shared goals. Integrated schools that provide excellent academics for all of our kids is something that I can safely say every candidate for city council in this district and other districts wants. So I have worked really hard on doing that. It doesn't always mean I agree with the United Federation of Teachers, who are doing a really bad job right now, the labor leadership, not the individual teachers, but the labor leadership of opening our schools and getting our children back into schools. And I'm very proud about the work that I have done to insist that we reopen our schools, which can be open safely now, as has been proven again and again. I have been an advocate all my life. As a public defender, you stand up and fight for individual clients, and as an elected school leader, and by the way, I was the elected city council member with the highest number of votes, not just in my district, but within all of Manhattan. And I continue to sit on that council, and I will serve in whatever capacity I'm able to. I have always been fighting for what my community needs, whether it's a school community or whether it's my individual client. Right now, we need a lot. We need safer streets. We need people who are willing to buck the trend of refusing to talk about how important it is to have safe patrols on our streets from the NYPD that allow people to be on our subways and on our streets, and to have real communication with the NYPD to increase safety in the streets. And we also need to support businesses, because we have to move. Sure, I'll wrap it up. We have to move beyond talking about businesses surviving the pandemic and talk about businesses thriving, because that's where we're going to see the future of our city and of our neighborhoods. And I very much thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Maud. And now I'll turn it over to my co-president, Patrick Cannell.
Thanks, Michael. First of all, I just want to thank Michael and the entire executive committee of New Downtown Dems for putting this all together. There are a lot of volunteer hours that go on in the background to pull off something like this and to get everybody together. I know we didn't get to all of the topics and things that would interest everybody. And I'm sorry about that, but hopefully we will have more opportunities to talk in the future, particularly on the big issues. I want to especially thank the candidates. I thought this was a rather productive and positive conversation, and I hope that everyone found it informative, but mostly I'd like to thank all of you, the audience members, club members, members of the public who've joined us. We hope you found it informative, and it is, we think, especially important this year that we hear from all of the candidates together. As has been pointed out in the chat, and hopefully folks know, this is a year where we will be voting. New York City residents will be voting by ranked choice voting. It's a different system than voters are used to. It applies only to the city races. So, you know, the mayor, public advocate, and city council person. It won't apply to the state races like the DA, but it's very important to understand how all of that works. And that's something, an issue that our club holds near and dear to our hearts, to make sure that there's a lot of outreach and education on that issue. And we would encourage everyone to check out on our website, newdowntowndems.org. And I know Michael dropped it in the chat. There's a link to a seminar that we put on a couple of weeks ago with some knowledgeable experts about ranked choice voting that we hope everybody will get up to speed on that. I'd ask our members and ask those who would like to become members to sign up to join us on February 16th, Saturday, February 16th at 4 p.m. For our endorsement meeting. We'll endorse for a number of offices, including City Council. And to sign up for that, you can visit our website. Again, it's newdowntowndems.org. Follow us on Twitter at newdowntowndems, and we'll be sending out an email to those who are currently on our list. So thank you again to everyone, and have a great afternoon.